Welcome everyone. We will wait just about 1 minute for other people to join. Okay, I think I'm going to get started. So hello everyone, good morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you're joining from, and welcome to MBON Fridays. My name is Alexis Ball and I'm joining you from Vancouver, Canada. I'm a PhD candidate and instructor at the University of British Columbia, and I will be moderating today's session. Today's session is focused on plankton, small organisms' massive impact. Though often invisible, plankton play foundational roles in marine ecosystems, global climate regulation, and even our cultural and economic systems. Today's session showcases a global collaboration that applied the Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, the life framework of values, to reframe how we understand and appreciate plankton from, as, in, and with nature. We're joined by two fantastic speakers who helped lead this effort, Dr. Maria Grigoratou and Dr. Christian Lindemann. I'll now briefly introduce them before we begin. So, Dr. Maria Grigoratou is a biological oceanographer specializing in plankton ecology and science policy coordination. She is currently the executive secretary of the European Polar Board and a lead author for the IPBES monitoring assessment. She earned her PhD in marine ecology and has worked across Europe and North America, including at Mercator Ocean International, where she coordinated the G7 Future of the Seas and Ocean Initiative. Dr. Christian Lindemann is a research scientist at the Norwegian Institute for Water Research, where he focuses on ocean biogeochemistry, carbon cycling, and plankton ecosystem modeling. He combines fieldwork and numerical modeling to understand carbon uptake in marine systems, from short-term processes to climate-relevant scales. He also works on blue carbon, stakeholder engagement, and interdisciplinary integration of natural and social sciences. We'll begin with presentations from both speakers, starting with Christian, and we'll follow that with 15 minutes of open discussion. So please post your questions in the chat or the Q&A box, and I'll relay them during the discussion session. So over to you, Christian.
Yes, hello everybody. Lovely to be here. Let me share my presentation with you. I hope you can see it all. Yes. So, hello everybody. My name is Chris Lindemann, and I have the pleasure of introducing to you some of the work we've been doing over a long time together. And first, I should really say that I'm only the presenter. So you can see this is really a big collaborative effort that has been going on for quite a while, together with a lot of people from different places and different backgrounds. So all of you probably have some sort of idea of what plankton is. We all do, and depending on our background, they might be quite different. So if you're a taxonomist, this might be something you might be thinking of. You might realize that this is not to scale. If you're a modeler, you might think about state variables, probably phytoplankton and zooplankton, maybe a couple of them, but this is roughly the biodiversity most large ecosystem models are able to capture or do commonly capture. If you're a fishery scientist, you might think of large krill swarms. If you're an economist, you might have other economical values in mind. And if you work in policy, you might think of plankton indicators. And of course, all of that is correct, but as already sort of coming from this, plankton is very diverse, and we quite often do not capture the entire scope. And right up front, I will not be able to capture the entire scope of plankton in this presentation. This is probably more a work of a lifetime. But I would like to provide a small glimpse into what we have been doing over the last few years, really. So first up, of course, we all know plankton is very diverse, and it actually spans 7 orders of magnitude in size. So this is from small viruses all the way to long siphonophores of several meters. And if you think about 7 orders of magnitude in singular length, that would be roughly from the size of your nail to the length of Great Britain. So this is really gives us an idea of how diverse plankton really is. It's also in the oceans as well as in freshwater systems, very much present in most forms. So most aquatic organisms are either entirely planktonic or have planktonic life stages. They're meroplankton. So this includes the common copperpod that we usually know and krill, but also really fish, starfish, octopods, crab, all sorts of benthic organisms, but even mosquitoes, for example, their larval stages are planktonic. So it is really in a lot of different places, and it's omnipresent in aquatic ecosystems. However, we're not really here to talk about what is plankton, but we're here more to talk about what is the value. How do we value plankton? So in order to be able to assess this in any way, we used a framework that already is introduced by Alexis, was introduced by the Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services and their value assessment. And guided by this, we categorize plankton into 6 categories. So that is biogeochemistry, which is what we sort of commonly think about if we are thinking more on the physical or chemical side, the ecology, so that is more the biological perspective on it. And of course, they play a key role in climate and climate regulation. So these are more the natural categories, but they are also very important for the evolution of science, where they played a key role. They have a huge economic value, a very diverse economic value as well. And they're very relevant in our human culture or in our recreation and well-being. So in the next few minutes, I'm going to highlight certain aspects of that, and I'm really only able to give some examples, but the forthcoming paper includes many more examples. So yes, I will just highlight certain aspects to give an idea of what the diversity really represents for us. So plankton, the foundation, the aquatic food web. Many of us know that, of course, that the planktonic food web really interlinks a lot or most of aquatic ecosystems. It feeds small and big fish, corals, mammals, sharks, sea turtles, a wide variety of fish. And through that interconnected nature of this ecosystem, it supports ecosystem stability and biodiversity and leads to the transfer of energy and matter to larger predators. Of course, the plankton food web in itself is complex, and this is a very simple depiction of it. It is very, very complex, but that if that would be depicted, nobody would understand anything. So what I would like to highlight here is that in the planktonic food web itself, also we do have a lot of recycling of nutrients and upcycling of nutrients. So polyunsaturated fatty acids, commonly known, or you might know it as a food supplement called omega-3. So they are produced by plankton. So we have that. So they also provide, through all of this together, they do provide a lot of connectivity across the oceans, as well as for land systems. From there, of course, we also do know that they are very relevant for climate and climate regulation. Carbon absorbs, depending on estimates, 20 to 40% of anthropogenically produced CO2 in the atmosphere. But of course, on the other side, we also do know that only a certain proportion of that is in the end stored on climate timescales, while a lot of it is recycled or basically cycled up to higher trophic levels, where a lot of other dynamics happen. But nevertheless, it does play a key function in our Earth climate. These were the more natural parts of the planktonic food web of the plankton. But we were talking here about how do we relate to plankton besides these natural aspects, and a lot of common frameworks do take biodiversity management in our perspective, if you will, ecosystem services into consideration. And in that context, they have been recognized as essential ocean and climate variables. So essentially, variables that are standards, where there are standards to measure and that can be coherently measured through different areas to make sense of other properties of the ocean. So this starts to relate more to our realm. And just briefly, these are some of the essential ocean variables. So plankton, biomass, and biodiversity. Zooplankton, biomass, and biodiversity. An emerging one, which is microbes. And then ocean color, which is commonly also brought up in this context. Now we measure chlorophyll, abundance, biomass, etc., and turn these into indicators for something else. For example, phytoplankton abundance itself, or community composition, or bloom frequency, or as biogeochemical cycling indicators. And then those are used in ecosystem monitoring, where they are used for monitoring of eutrophication or hubs, food web structure, fisheries, etc. So when we measure those, or when we have these monitoring approaches, we do put them in context of policy frameworks, right? And these are just some of the examples and I brought to try to find different examples here to show a bit of the diversity of different policy frameworks where they are being used. So, for example, for ballast water, the International Maritime Organization has ballast water performance standards where they are being used. We have them in the UN Environmental Plan for the Mediterranean Action Plan, where they are used to indicate the good environmental status, something most European countries unfortunately fail to achieve. We find them as nutrient reduction policies, as well as, for example, used by ICES, the International Council for the Exploration of the Sea, for cod and herring recording to actually set fishing quotas based on ecosystem-based management approaches. We also actually do find them in monitoring assessments that are linked to national laws. So other examples in this context are, for example, in Australia, where they are used by the Australian and Queensland government to support adaptive management of the Great Barrier Reef. We do find them in South Africa, where they're being used to monitor the safety and quality of shellfish, so against contaminants as well. So a very different approach as well, where they don't care so much about plankton itself, but it translates into other non-planktonic entities of interest. There are different ways of doing this. So the National Aquatic Resource Survey in the US, for example, has a statistical survey design. That's a collaboration being done in between the EPA, states, and different tribes. And this data also feeds into global biodiversity information systems, GBIF. Many of you are probably familiar with. An example here is from the long-term ecological research program in Brazil. So they really link up, these indicators really link up to a vast variety of different policies and laws, regulations, and frameworks where they address a vast scope of different things. So why do we care about that? Well, obviously there is an economic value related to it. And if we look at that, these are just some examples. There are many, many more, but we farm and we fish plankton. It also supports fisheries. So if you look, for example, the global krill fisheries are estimated to be $1.8 billion US. Interestingly, this is not a one-way street, and I guess nobody here is really surprised about that. But exploration of krill, for example, has been estimated to reduce the biomass by around about 10%. If we would turn that into carbon, the cost of it would be roughly 0.4 to 4.6 billion US dollars a year. These are very variable figures that depends on how you calculate it, and there's a lot of certainty around it, but it just goes to show that exploration comes with a cost that we do not always consider in our straightforward estimates, or when we just bring up this one number. I mentioned water quality, so it is really relevant for water quality. It supports recreational industries, and an example here is, I think it was 2 big red tides that were in Florida. Frank, you might know that better, in 17 and 19. And the overall cost of this was estimated to be 184 million US dollars to the local economy, not to speak of job loss, which I understand was also significant. A different part that hasn't been brought up so far is the use of plankton in pharmaceuticals, cosmetics, and so forth. So if we are thinking about the marine-derived anti-cancer drugs, that is a huge market, estimated to be billions to trillions of US dollars. Not all of that is, of course, directly exploited, but there is a significant part. And of course, we're talking about climate and carbon removal. So we are talking about climate. The value of the fossil fuel industry is, of course, extremely high, but there is also biofuels, commonly grown in bioreactors, which do also produce significant value. And I brought MCDR in here because we also, of course, exploit other resources like lime, and liming, for example, is one of the key aspects for alkalinity enhancement. So there's a lot of relations in a lot of different aspects, how our economy really relates to plankton. Luckily, as humans, we do not define ourselves only through economic value, but maybe more importantly, through our cultural values. And these are some examples. So there is, for example, furniture that has been inspired by plankton, some lovely dinosaur diatom chairs, as well as a plankton lamp in this example. We do know, commonly presented in art and photography, Ernst Haeckel was one of the first ones that might be known to many, but also we do see it in dance performances. It's inspired fashion, jewelry. We all might know this, unfortunately, copyrighted and therefore now a bit different looking copperpot character from the television, especially if we have kids. I think it's over 60 countries that have produced stamps that were plankton themed. We do have music. These are two records that are clearly plankton themed, and goes to architecture, so plankton inspired buildings, as well as a variety of different books that have been non-scientific books, I should say, that have been inspired or are directly focusing on plankton. So there is a huge amount of human culture, human art, and value in that respect on plankton as well. Now, plankton also is very important for the evolution of science. And I see I might be running a bit short here, so I'll bring that up briefly. But Tillman's famous competition theory, Tillman was a freshwater planktologist, so he dealt with plankton in that sense. Also the records, geological records have helped to recreate the Earth's history, and plankton itself, if you will, has already won 3 Nobel Prizes, the latest one in 2009. So it clearly contributes to the evolution of science in our own development and discovery aspects. Now, the question here is, how do we relate to plankton? And that came up earlier. And to address this, we focused on the life framework of values, which is a concept that encompasses the core principles and beliefs that guide our individual actions and decisions throughout their life. And it focuses on it's 3+1, if you will, points. It addresses living from, living with, living in, and living as nature. And this policy framework has been adapted, or this framework has been adopted by IPBES as well. So if we put this in a context of plankton, we can say that from nature, for plankton, we focus on the capacity of nature to provide these resources. Plankton with nature centers more around the right of organisms to exist independently of human needs or presence. So what is plankton without us? What happens if we try to take us out of the equation? Plankton in nature emphasizes the role that plankton in this case has for humans, for our identity, our lifestyles, our culture, our heritage. And then plankton as nature, which I think has been added a bit later to this group, highlights our physical, mental, and spiritual interconnectedness with the natural world. So, plankton from nature. Well, that's sort of the easy one, or the obvious one. It is the one that we most commonly would think about. Plankton supports the biogeochemical stability of aquatic ecosystem. It absorbs and stores carbon and contributes to Earth's climate regulation. It plays a vital role in maintaining water quality and also for global food security, its interconnectedness with the aquatic food web. Through the deposits of plankton are being mined for energy in different forms, for agriculture, as well as for construction. So it does provide a lot of natural resources that we classically would think about. And it provides the physiology and ecology, contributes to advances in science, including in medicine, biotechnology, and biomedics. So we look then at plankton with nature. Well, how do we see them independently, plankton of us? Well, plankton makes Earth livable for aquatic as well as terrestrial ecosystems. Produce a lot of oxygen. Commonly, it's being said 50%, even though while that rate might be correct, it might be a bit different because a lot of the oxygen is actually being recycled in the system, so not all of it might be available. But nevertheless, it is really important for terrestrial ecosystems. It provides a continuous linkage, populations over time and space, which allows for evolution. There's a vast number of plankton species. Many of them are not known, and in particular, the characteristics, life cycles, or interactions have not been described. So we could say that we need plankton, while plankton does not really need us so much. So bringing it to plankton in nature, what is the value of plankton to our culture? And I mentioned some examples previously. So it has a profound impact on culture and recreational activities, in particular for coastal communities. There's a lot of heritage there as well. We can see, I didn't really show that, but there are very old examples of the use or interaction of plankton, both for medical reasons as well as in a cultural space. It inspires creativity in art, literature, and design, and it promotes the public awareness and conservation of aquatic ecosystems. Through awareness of plankton, we are more aware of the ecosystem itself, and we value it higher, and therefore do have a higher degree of have a high desire to conserve it. And lastly, as nature, plankton as nature, Well, plankton as nature, it has an intrinsic value as it is an essential part of the earth. And as I mentioned in the previous point as well, through that it cultures respect for nature and it fosters sustainable practices and protecting biodiversity. So to sum up, or in short, these four categories: plankton for nature provides biogeochemical stability and climate regulation, different resources, provides food security, energy, and materials, and it helps the advancements of medicine and biotechnology. We are thinking of plankton with nature. Well, plankton makes really life livable, and we are here because of them. Many of the planktonic species and interactions have not yet been described, and only plankton without us really knows about it. So plankton in nature, there is a profound effect on culture and recreational activities, and it has inspired a lot of creativity, art, and literature and design. And last but not least, plankton as nature, about recognizing the intrinsic value of plankton. So if we think about, I think this is one of the points, at least for me, it has been why the reason for this paper, or what I also found most interesting about it, is because we often value it from our particular angle, from our own little niche, and it really doesn't do it any justice. And that is natural. There is no, we come from our own perspective, but in the end, if we do get a bit of a broader sense and better understanding in general, it might help us to really value plankton, even though we argue that it is immeasurable, but we can still get a better understanding of it. And by doing so, we will be able to embrace more sustainable practices and ensure the continued abundance and diversity of plankton, which in the end is not only to the benefit of plankton, but certainly also to our own. And I thank you with that. I thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you. I'm inspired. That's amazing. Next, we have Maria. We have a couple questions in the chat, but we'll save those for the discussion. Over to you, Maria.
Thank you. Chris, can you stop sharing your screen? Great. So I can share mine. Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for being here. And thank you very much to Chris for giving this really nice overview of the work we have done. And it will be hopefully published out very soon at the Journal of Bioscience. And I think you can see now my screen well. Can you? Yes, I can see. Yeah. Great. So here, I just wanted to take a few minutes to say, how did we get here? How do 47 authors from 26 countries managed to work together on this article, and why we did that? The reason why we did that is because we're all passionate about plankton. Most of us were working with plankton from modeling, from the field, from the lab. We have this group of authors. We have most of us were marine plankton experts, but we also have some experts from freshwater ecosystems. And many times we have been asked why people should care about plankton. And we know there's a lot of information there and the books about plankton, scientific and non-scientific, but we wanted to create a short summary as a key reference point for everyone interested in plankton to have and try to dive in deeper. So of course we understand that our main audience are plankton experts, but we would like to see this paper touching the minds of policymakers, decision makers, everyone interested in plankton, educators, artists. And the reason why I mention that is because when this paper will be out soon, you will also see that the writing tried to manage that. So we have small, concise sections that try to cover everything that Chris presented here in a way that it can be hopefully appealing to different audience. But how did we manage to get there? This idea is a result of a collaborative effort that was created in 2020 from two networks. The first one is MODIV. It was or modeling different components of marine plankton diversity. And the second network was the functional group of the US Marine Biodiversity Observation Network. So a little bit about MODIV, the first one. It was led by Fi and Esteban. It was a Euromarine Foresight workshop, and it was also supported by another grant, Filamo, that Chris was the co-PI, and he was very involved in MODIV as well. And the aim was to collect some modelers, mostly from Europe, but also from Japan and the US. And I was based in the US back at the time where I joined MODIV, to bring a fresh perspective on how we model plankton diversity and biodiversity, and how we model plankton diversity in ecosystem functions. And we wanted to publish that so we can motivate the research community to include plankton biodiversity effects across models and scales, different modeling and different scaling. So from genetic to ecosystem, and from modern to paleo ecosystems. And we also wanted to create a paper that will establish the plankton biodiversity and diversity as a crucial research topic. We published this paper, and we had a lot of discussions back in 2019 and 2020 about how we will write this paper. And there were a lot of discussions back then on what kind of observations we need, what kind of data we need, what the observing community seeks from the models. And I was lucky enough at the same time to be a member of the US MBON functional ecology group that back then was led by Jeffrey Range at the US from the Gulf of Maine Research Institute. And the aim of this group was to enhance our understanding on the importance of functional diversity. This group still exists, so if anyone's interested, you can join. It's also focusing mostly on US research, but people outside the US can also join. And it also had an interest to connect observations with modeling and forecasting. So I was one of these people that they act as a communication bridge between different experts. So every time I was going to a modeling meeting, I was saying to my colleagues, oh, at this MBON meeting, we discussed this. And every time I was at this MBON meeting, I was like, oh, these colleagues at MODIV, we discuss that. So we said, okay, let's start and talk together. So we had this idea of bring these groups together. And here I want to give special thanks to Frank Muller-Karger, who is a professor in the US and also chairing the US MBON, because he really helped me to develop this idea to something really nice. So I had this idea, let's bring these groups together. And we said, okay, let's make a workshop. And then Frank was like, okay, what do you want to have in these workshops? And I was like, I don't know, just people to meet and talk. So with Chris and Jeff and Frank and Defi, we put together, and some other colleagues, we put together this workshop. And it was very interesting for these two communities to meet and interact. And we were so excited about the momentum that the workshop itself created that we said, okay, we want to go a bit beyond. We were thinking of creating a perspective paper, and then we said, if we want this to be a community paper, let's invite also people outside MBON and MODIV. And this is when we decided to create an organizing committee and create a host and create a series of online plankton workshops from that crossing different continents, so we can get the perspectives from different experts. And here I want to say that none MODIV and MBON, they really wanted to take credits on that. But after some thinking I had and discussions, we decided that this other workshop that we will do will be under the umbrella of MBON, because MBON is a very important network for the community. And it's good when we create this kind of opportunities, if we want to think about their continuation and the legacy, to connect them with networks that they have the experience and they also work in this direction. So instead of trying to create something new, let's work with existing networks we have. So this is what we did. We put together a new organizing committee that will reflect more the global perspective. And in green, you can see the members from the motive group, the modeling group, and in blue, you can see the members from MBON. And interestingly enough, you can see that we have a lot of our members from the organizing committee that they were not connected with any of these two groups. And that was on purpose because we acknowledged that there was a lot of expertise outside this group that they should be brought in from on the organization level. And we had these workshops. We targeted to have small participation so we can have some fruit interactions, thinking the online setup. And there were a lot of discussions about the value of plankton. And this is where we said, okay, now let's write something. Let's make this point of reference for people to read. So we made the poll to all workshop participants who wants to join to develop this article, and then we create this group of 47 authors. It was the first time that all these authors worked together, and this paper was not attached to a common project. And this is very important because it translates to extra work that you need to fit somewhere. Some authors, they managed to connect that with other activities they're doing, and this article brought a lot of projects together that you can see when it's out on the funding acknowledgements. But some authors, they also just contribute only on their free time with no any specific project attached to it. And as you can understand, 47 authors, it's not so easy to coordinate. So we had this small group team of leading authors. And then we decided to have an approach where this core team will develop the draft. And then we're going to have 2 rounds of revision that last around 9 months from all co-authors. And this is a similar approach that IPCC or IPBES frameworks that they use. And the engagement was quite strong. We received around 1,500 comments that the lead authors need to work with to create the paper that you will be able to read soon. And this work also lasted quite a long time, as Chris mentioned before. It was around 3 years to develop. And the reason why it also took us so long is because none of us had dedicated funding to work on this project. So there were some pauses, and most of the pauses were from the lead author as well, as we try to combine different things in life. And the reason why I mentioned that is because we think it's important not to romanticize a situation. And if someone is inspired by this work, it's good to know the challenges that we faced, and not having dedicated time to work on that. It is, of course, a challenge. And in the development of the years, we managed to get some support from 2 European projects, EU for Oceanops and Biogeochemistry, that also cover the expenses for the open publication fees. And we're very happy that that these projects agreed to cover that because they saw the value and the importance of this article. So the last thing I want to say is if anyone is interested in making a collaborative work and connect their passion with others people's and help make something that goes beyond his person legacy, please connect with networks that already exist. And here's just an example of MBON. These networks are there to create space for connection, collaboration, and coordination. There's a lot of misinformation. There's a lot of tasks happening around us. There's a lot topics emerging that they need the response of science in everyday life more than we had in the past. And that will continue in an increasing rhythm as we experience more the effects of climate change. So we as scientists, we need to find ways to work smarter, and we have to vote to try to create better outcomes with less duplication. And networks like MBON offer this environment for us to help to work together. And also, if you're part of a network that also makes you feel that you're part of a community that shares ideas and solve problems and help us better to develop collective knowledge, and it creates an opportunity for people to ask, answer, and involve their careers and their mindset through time. And here I want to really say that MBON and other maybe similar community networks, they are a very good support and spotlight for early career scientists. When I got involved with MBON and Motive, I was an early career, just finished my PhD, and MBON gave me a lot of exposure exposure. I got great mentorship from there. Frank Muller-Karger, I still see him as a great mentor. I got a lot of career insight on what I want to do, and me being here now, the executive secretary of the European Polar Board, it was also MBON had a little bit of contribution in that. And also these networks, they give you the opportunity to get access to decision makers. For example, in the US, because a lot of the MBON programs are funded by NOAA, you have the opportunity to interact with some federal agents. And the MBON community, it's a very open community. They care about ideas. They don't care from whom is coming. If you're 20 years of experience or you just started. If there is an idea that has an importance and an interest, people will listen. So this is what we wanted to say. I don't think that this effort would have ever happened if we didn't have a network to support it behind. And we hope that people will get access to our paper soon, and they will be inspired from learning more about the value of plankton and how collective networks help us to develop materials like the article that Chris presented. So that's all I wanted to say.
Thank you so much, both of you. I just want to address the question in the chat first because it seems timely. Frank and Joanna have already kind of addressed it, but maybe Chris and Maria, if you want to say something quickly. Someone asked, how do we connect with MBON, and is there any requirement?
Maybe I can share my experience again. Well, the easiest way is to contact the MBON secretary and Joanna Soares. How I joined, I was just interacting with Jeffrey Rance, who at the time was the leader of the US MBON Function Ecology group. And we were just talking, and it's like, oh, Maria, just join. So MBON is very open. You don't, some MBON has offices in the, regional scope in the US, in Europe, and in Asia. Some programs are tightly related to MBON. For example, US have dedicated funding for MBON. In some other continents like Europe, you don't have this finance strongly direct connection. And anyone can just join. There are a lot of groups, working groups that the MBON has, specific on different topics. And you can join any groups you want based on your interest, and you can contribute even if you don't work directly on an MBON project. The community is very open.
Great, thank you. So now I will just read out the questions that we had in the Q&A. We had a couple during your presentation, Chris. Do the marine CDR estimates include CO2 absorption via ocean fertilization, or did you include that in climate services?
Yes, so I can see, so the values that I showed, they were indeed only for fossil fuel industry, so oil and gas, and then the biofuel part was only for biofuel production. So none of these values were related to MCDR. I just thought I'd bring it up, I mention it, because of course we all know that use of fossil fuels is not necessarily the best for our climate. So I wanted to highlight that existing, if you will, fossil plankton can also be used in a different context. So for liming, for example, for alkalinity enhancement. I don't know if that answers your question, Stefano.
Okay, so now we'll move on to Lisa's question. When it comes to restoring plankton, is this a case of removing external pressures and restoring the habitats or conditions which plankton rely on, rather than some kind of active restoration?
So I'm not entirely sure which part of the, when that question, which part of the presentation that refers to, in a sense of restoring plankton. If this was, yeah, if you could maybe explain, that would be helpful if that's possible.
Yes, Lisa, if you would like to type in the chat, because I also didn't catch exactly what slide that was on. Maybe for now we could answer the next question and then jump back to Lisa if we hear from her. Can we collect all the useful plankton and extract high value products? So PUFAs, carotenoids.
Collect in a sense of collect a database or a knowledge base, or collect as in extract them? So I think that is an interesting question we have in this paper. And as I mentioned, there is a significant appendix that when the paper is out, you will see it, which collects a lot of the background information and provides a vast array of different examples from policy and art and science, as well as citizen science, which I did not really touch upon. So I do think it would be really valuable to create such a knowledge base to understand the values of the different high value products that come from plankton. I think that would be a great idea to do. It would be very interesting. As for if the question goes more into the direction, can we actually extract them? I don't know. And I also don't know if we even know all the different high value products that are there. And maybe there's also some value in not knowing the full potential. That's sort of more of a cautionary approach, I know, but yeah, so I think that is a very, it's a very multifaceted answer.
Okay, Lisa has answered in the chat. So she said it's more of a general question, as we have had discussions around how we could try to restore plankton. The best way seems to be on removing pressures. So yeah, I think she's asking more about conserving or protecting plankton versus their environments and the conditions that make them thrive.
Yeah, so I think what we try to do here in this paper is to raise awareness to it, because in the end, if we're talking about how we can restore or protect plankton, then it really comes down to our willingness in the end. And for that, we do need an awareness about it. Usually it is hard to have a willingness for something that you're not aware of. So therefore, I think what we actually try to do here is sort of lay some sort of groundwork, a certain fundament, if you will, to share awareness towards the many different values up to a degree where it's not measurable anymore, of plankton. And then with that, we can try to find ways. There's always a balance, I guess, to be struck in between what part we value and what part we don't, because quite often, or in several situations, there might be values. When we value one thing, we might have less appreciation of something else in that context. So if we're thinking about exploration, there's value in money, there's value in food security, but there's of course also then value in maybe reduced carbon emissions or threatening marine ecosystems and functioning marine ecosystems. So that is it's a challenging question, I think, but it's a really good question.
Maria, you've raised your hand.
Yeah, just I think to follow up with Chris said, the tricky part with plankton is that we don't have any endangered plankton species yet. We don't, and plankton, they're not one of these charismatic species like a whale or a seabird that people can see and relate. So sometimes it's hard to capture how we can protect and have these sustainable practices ensuring the diversity and abundance of plankton that will continue for the next generations to come. And this is what Chris mentioned, it's really hard to tackle. And going back to Lisa's comment, yes, the only way to really protect and think about best practice to sustain plankton is how you sustain their environment. So minimize carbon emission, take actions that they will not have negative impacts in the ecosystems, and don't try to push the ecosystems to their tipping points or their maximum capacity. These are ways that this is how you ensure that the foundation of the ecosystems, it stays also in a good position. And as Chris said, it's quite tricky to conceptualize that in actionable measurables and say, if you take this action, you protect X amount of plankton or you sustain X amount of plankton. It's a more holistic approach. And this is why we made all this paper, and we used on purpose the value of nature, the life framework of values that IPBES also use, because it's not about one value. It's not about an economic value or what we're getting from plankton. It's a holistic perspective, how we see human in nature and nature without necessarily the human element in it.
Thank you for that. Speaking of estimating their value, we have a great question from Frank. So historically, we've modeled parts of the carbon cycle, including primary productivity and the biological carbon pump, where carbon is included as either biomass rates or fluxes. So you have showed the amazing biodiversity of plankton, from microorganisms to larger organisms, which the visuals were amazing. Should we account for this diversity in modeling the ocean, such as for carbon sequestration and cycling, or as bulk rates, or is bulk rates good enough? So yeah, I think if I could add on to this question from Frank, like essentially, should we be modeling these different groups of zooplankton as independent groups, or is the bulk rate of all of them good enough?
So I think that's a really tricky one, and I think the biggest for me, or the way that I see it, is the biggest challenge here is uncertainties. So we can, of course, it would be nice if we were able to have a better representation or a more realistic representation of the ecosystem in our models. That is ideally, I think, what would be really nice to achieve. But of course, that does not only put technical and time constraints on us, but it does also put constraints on knowledge. So if we do not really know which one are the key players, and part of science is discovery. The German word actually says Wissenschaft, so the creation of knowledge. It's a really nice way, I think, of looking at it. So if we are looking at it from a scientific perspective, we are creating knowledge, which means that we do not necessarily know what was there before. And by doing so, it implies that it can be really challenging to understand what are the key parts and what are not. So therefore, just adding more is not necessarily the most effective way forward. So I do think it depends a bit on the question as who are we talking to as well. So if we are talking to policymakers, quite often the message needs to be very simple, of course, because they don't necessarily have the time or willingness to understand the nitty-gritty parts that might be relevant. So then, of course, we do need a higher reduction. But on the other hand, if you're talking to somebody else that has more interest in or ecological understanding per se, then it might be a different answer. I don't know if there's a good answer, but I think in general we have seen an increase in complexity of models, and that came with an increase in knowledge and technical capabilities, and it led or is leading to basically more accurate forecasting and projections. So if we cautionarily walk towards that, that might be a good way forward. I don't know, that's my perspective on it.
Thank you. I have a question for both of you. You made this study extremely accessible, which I really appreciate. I feel, as you said, this was part of your effort is ensuring that almost anyone could pick it up and read it. Do you have any plans to deliver this information to policymakers and kind of hand off this study to them?
Can I start? Yes, I want to say, well, we're 47 authors, and of course, we will when it's finally out, which we hope it's going to be really soon. It's at the final stages of editing, so the journal can publish it. Of course, all of us, we're going to promote it to our network, and we will, many of us are connected with policy. We have 3 authors of the article are also currently IPBES authors, and we will share that with IPBES. We also have a lot of authors that are connected with IPCC, and a lot of authors are connected through their projects with policymakers. And only, for example, from looking a bit Europe and EU more specifically, we had 5 EU projects connected, and already some of our project officers and the policymakers have received a copy of this, and we already have a quote for a news article that we developed that with a policymaker from the Commission, as highlighting the importance of this kind of documents. We also have a specific supplementary material, a table with different policy frameworks around the globe, where different policymakers can see examples how they use plankton variables that Chris presented an example, and how they're using them in different countries. And we will try to do that in our best capacity. But we also hope that the broader community will welcome this article, and they will also try to push that. And with that, I will give the floor to Chris if he has any comment.
Well, I think you covered it pretty much there, but I do agree that since the goal of this article and also the way it was written was meant to be accessible, it does make sense to also not only make it accessible in a passive way, but in an active way.
And another question from myself. What advice would you give to early career researchers that are doing research on plankton, but aren't necessarily working hand in hand with someone that can reach policymakers? What can they do to get their research in the hands of policymakers?
Shall I start and Chris give you the floor afterwards? Well, I will, as I share my experience, connect with existing networks, and MBON is a great network to do that. Especially if you are in the US, the MBON programs are directly linked with NOAA because they're coming from federal fundings, and you will have the opportunity and MBON covers all marine life, so it's not only plankton. So if you're doing something else, you can also find a house in MBON. And I was lucky enough to join some of the meetings they had and some seminars where NOAA agents were there, and I could talk with them. And interestingly enough, just to say, I mentioned before that at least for MBON, I don't know what other similar networks work, but at least for MBON, people care about the idea and what you say. They don't care about your career status. And I remember once in a meeting, they put something on the chat. I didn't want to interrupt the discussion. And then the policymakers got that, and they start building a discussion around it. And back then, to me, 1 year after I finished my PhD, it was very exciting to see that actually my ideas have a value that they don't necessarily reflect on an established career level. So connect with networks. Also connect with early careers networks that they exist either in your country or even like on the UN Decade Ocean, for example. And Alexis, I know you're a member of that. They give an opportunity to connect and interact, and just be bold and contact people. the worst thing that can happen is they will never reply to the email. It's fine. People, I think, can live with that. But you never know how much you're losing by just being shy of asking something. Make a nice email of relevance, explaining why you want to create this content and go for it. And Chris, I will give the floor to you.
Yeah, no, I agree. I guess how to connect this to, or how to become relevant in the policy space, probably talk to policymakers. And that might sound very easy. It was easy to say, of course, and might be harder to do. But I agree. I think we quite often sort of say, or tell ourselves, oh, I don't know so much about this. What can I contribute? A lot of self-doubt. And as you said, the worst thing that can happen is you don't get a reply. But similarly, I also do think quite often we do have a lot to contribute, especially because it is an outsider's perspective. And quite often I do think that that is a very high value where actually afterwards people appreciate it because they sit in their own little groups, or we all sit in our own little groups. And sometimes somebody coming from the outside with something different can stir the pot much more and have a much higher contribution than just talking to the same people. So I do think, don't be shy. Just go out there.
Say yes. Okay, well, it is the top of the hour, so I would just like to thank Maria and Chris for your wonderful presentations. This has been a really inspiring talk and meeting. And thank you to everyone that joined. We hope you continue to join us for the MBON Friday sessions. And until then, take care.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. It was a really great session.
Joanna, I hope I didn't over-promote